Good morning, friends, and welcome back to Golden Vault Garden. Today, we are taking a little trip to the other side of the world, because I want to show you something that surprised me when I first learned about it. In Australia, there are flowers so lovely, so eye-catching, that gardeners have grown them for generations. And yet, in many parts of that country, growing them is now against the law. Now, before you worry, this is not a video about anything scary happening in your own backyard here in the United States. Think of this more as a fascinating lesson in how a garden that looks perfectly innocent can quietly cause enormous damage to the wild places around it. Australia has one of the most delicate ecosystems on Earth. Many of its plants and animals exist nowhere else in the world, having evolved in isolation for millions of years without the kind of competition that plants and animals on other continents are used to facing. Because that balance is so fragile, a flower that seems completely harmless sitting quietly in a flower bed can become a serious problem the moment its seeds drift over the fence and into the surrounding bush. Think of it this way. A plant that struggles to compete back in its home country might find that Australia has no natural predators, no diseases it has adapted to fight off, and no competing plants that have ever learned to outgrow it. That is often exactly what turns a pretty ornamental into what scientists call an invasive species. So today, we are going to look at 7 flowers that are banned or heavily restricted in parts of Australia. I think you will be amazed at how pretty some of these are, and even more amazed at the kind of trouble they can cause. And at the end, I will share some wonderful native alternatives that Australian gardeners plant instead, several of which you may even be able to find here at home in a similar form. I also want to mention something that applies just as much here in the United States as it does in Australia. Every state has its own list of noxious or invasive plants, and those lists change over time as scientists learn more about how certain species behave once they escape a garden. A flower that was sold at your local nursery 10 years ago might be on a watch list today. It is never a bad idea to glance at your state's Department of Agriculture website every so often, just to stay current, especially if you love bringing home new varieties every season. With that in mind, let's take our trip down under and meet these 7 surprising flowers. Let's start with the one flower on this list that is not actually about the environment at all. It is about the law in a very different way. This is the opium poppy, known botanically as Papaver somniferum. Now, if you grow the classic Redfield poppy, sometimes called the Flanders poppy, you have nothing to worry about. Those are the ones we see planted in memory of veterans, and they are completely legal to grow, both in Australia and here in the United States. The opium poppy is a different plant entirely. This particular variety is the source of raw opium, morphine, and codeine, and growing it without a strict government license is treated as a serious offense under Australian law. It does not matter if someone only wanted it for its beautiful ruffled petals or its old-fashioned cottage garden look. The law does not make exceptions for good intentions. Here is the part that always catches people off guard. Poppy seeds occasionally show up as a hidden ingredient in inexpensive wildflower seed mixes, or even in bird seed blends. If one of these sprouts in a garden by accident, the recommendation is always to remove it right away, before it has a chance to flower and set seed. Interestingly, some Australian states do allow specific ornamental poppy varieties that closely resemble the opium poppy in appearance, but lack the same chemical properties, and these are sold under carefully regulated names. This is a good example of how closely related plants can have very different legal standings, which is exactly why plant identification matters so much. The lesson here is a good one no matter where you garden. Always know exactly what you are planting, and be cautious with mystery wildflower mixes that do not clearly list every variety inside. If you ever receive seeds from a friend, a swap, or an online marketplace, and you are not 100% sure what they are, it is always worth doing a little research, or simply setting them aside, before adding them to your beds. Our second flower is one that many gardeners around the world have grown without a second thought. It is called the gazania, sometimes known as the treasure flower. These plants are wonderfully tough. They shrug off drought, they thrive in poor soil, and they produce cheerful, daisy-shaped blooms in warm shades of yellow, orange, and cream. For decades, they were a favorite choice for sunny nature strips and seaside gardens across Australia. But that same toughness is exactly what turned the gazania into a problem. In South Australia, it is now illegal to sell or plant this flower at all. Western Australia and parts of New South Wales have placed heavy restrictions on it as well. The reason comes down to those lightweight seeds. They catch the wind and travel far beyond the garden fence, landing in native bushland and along fragile coastal dunes. Once established there, Gazanias spread into dense mats that crowd out native ground covers, taking away food and shelter that local insects and small animals depend on. It is a gentle reminder that a plant does not need thorns or poison to cause harm. Sometimes all it takes is being a little too good at spreading. If you already have gazanias growing in a restricted area, you are generally not in trouble simply for having inherited them with your property. The real responsibility lies in not propagating them further, deadheading the spent blooms before they can set seed, and gradually replacing them with alternatives as your garden evolves. It is a good approach to keep in mind for any plant that turns out to be more enthusiastic than expected, whether you garden in Adelaide or Ohio. Our third flower might be one you already recognize, because it is grown in gardens all over the world, including many here in the United States. It is lantana. At first glance, lantana looks like a gardener's dream. Its small flower clusters shift through shades of pink, yellow, and orange as they age, giving each plant a rainbow effect that is genuinely beautiful to look at. But underneath that charm, lantana has earned a serious reputation in Australia, where it is officially classified as a weed of national significance. Left unchecked, it grows into thick, thorny thickets that smother native plants, prevent forests from regenerating naturally, and can even increase the risk of wildfire by creating dense, flammable undergrowth. There is also a safety concern much closer to home. The leaves and unripe berries of lantana are toxic to cattle, sheep, horses, and household pets. Across most Australian states, especially Queensland and New South Wales, landholders are legally required to control it wherever it appears on their property. If you happen to grow lantana here in the United States, this is worth keeping in mind too. Many states, including Florida and Texas, list it as invasive, so it is always worth checking your own local guidelines and choosing well-behaved varieties if you love the look. Plant breeders have actually developed sterile lantana cultivars over the years, specifically to give gardeners that same rainbow color effect without the seeds that allow the plant to spread uncontrolled. If lantana has always caught your eye, asking your local nursery about a sterile or low-seed variety is a wonderful way to enjoy the look responsibly. Our fourth flower has a name that tells a lovely story, even though the plant itself turned out to be far less charming than its name suggests. It is called bridal creeper. This climbing vine was brought to Australia in the 1800s as a prized ornamental. Brides loved weaving its delicate white flowers and glossy foliage into their wedding bouquets, which is exactly how it earned its romantic name. But once bridal creeper escaped into the wild, it revealed a very different side of itself. While the vine above ground still looks graceful, below the surface it forms an incredibly dense mat of tuberous roots. This root mat is so thick that it can block other seeds from ever reaching the soil, effectively starving the surrounding bushland of water and nutrients. Birds enjoy the small red berries and spread the seeds far and wide, which is part of why this plant has been so difficult to control. Today, it is illegal to sell, supply, or propagate bridal creeper anywhere in Australia. If it ever turns up uninvited in a garden, the advice is to dig out every last root tuber, since even a small piece left behind can regrow. Australian conservation groups have actually turned to biological control for this one, introducing a specific leafhopper and a rust fungus that both target bridal creeper specifically without harming native plants. It is a fascinating example of how much time and effort can go into undoing the damage caused by a single well-meaning ornamental introduction from more than a century ago. Our fifth flower is a succulent that has become genuinely popular with houseplant collectors, and it is easy to see why. It is called Mother of Millions. The name comes from its remarkable way of reproducing. Along the edges of its fleshy leaves, tiny baby plantlets form in neat rows. The gentlest breeze, or even a light brush of a hand, can knock them loose, and each one is capable of rooting almost instantly wherever it lands. A single plant can multiply into dozens within just a couple of months. With its architectural shape and clusters of soft pink, bell-shaped flowers, it is understandable why so many people are drawn to keeping it in a pot on a sunny windowsill. But in Queensland and New South Wales, it is officially declared a pest, and it is illegal to sell or release it into the environment. There is also an important safety note here, and this one matters for pet owners everywhere, not just in Australia. Mother of Millions contains compounds called cardiac glycosides, which affect the heart and can be fatal to grazing animals, dogs, and cats if enough of the plant is eaten. If you keep this succulent at home, it is worth placing it well out of reach of curious pets. This is actually a plant many of you may already recognize under a different common name here in the United States. since it is sometimes sold as the chandelier plant or the devil's backbone. It remains legal and quite popular in many American nurseries, which shows just how differently the same plant can be treated, depending on the ecosystem it is growing in. If you do keep one on a sunny windowsill, a high shelf well away from pets and small children is always the safest spot. Our sixth flower is a small tree that puts on quite a show. It is called yellow bells, also known as trumpet bush. This fast-growing shrub produces an abundance of bright yellow, trumpet-shaped flowers, and it has long been a favorite centerpiece for gardeners chasing a tropical look. In parts of New South Wales and Queensland, however, planting it is a direct violation of biosecurity regulations. The trouble lies in its seed pods, which are long and filled with lightweight, winged seeds built to travel on the wind. Yellow bells has a particular fondness for waterways and riverbanks, where it can form dense, single-species stands that crowd out native trees and disrupt the delicate habitats that grow along the water's edge. Because of this, it is strictly banned from sale or distribution across northern and eastern Australia. Here in the United States, yellow bells is actually grown quite happily in warm climate states like Arizona and parts of Texas, where the drier conditions and different surrounding plant life mean it does not spread with nearly the same intensity. It is a good example of how a plant's behavior can change dramatically depending on rainfall, soil, and the native species it is competing against, which is part of what makes gardening such a regional art. Our final flower may be the most beautiful one on this entire list. It is the water hyacinth. With its soft violet petals and a distinctive golden eye at the center, it genuinely looks like a floating orchid drifting across the water. But this plant carries a reputation as one of the most troublesome aquatic weeds anywhere in the world, and in Australia, it is strictly illegal to keep, sell, or move it in any form. What makes water hyacinth so concerning is simply how fast it grows. Under the right conditions, it can double in size in as little as 2 weeks. Left unchecked, it spreads into a thick, heavy carpet across ponds, dams, and rivers. That carpet blocks sunlight from reaching the plants living underwater, lowers the oxygen in the water, and can lead to fish dying off, while also creating ideal breeding conditions for mosquitoes. If this plant turns up in a backyard pond in Australia, biosecurity authorities are typically called in right away, and the penalties for keeping it can be quite severe. Water hyacinth actually has a complicated history here in the United States as well. It is classified as a noxious weed at the federal level and is banned or restricted in most states, including Florida, where it has clogged waterways for well over a century since it was first introduced as an ornamental at a cotton exposition in the 1880s. If you are drawn to floating water plants for a garden pond, water lettuce alternatives with proper containment, or simply a water lily, are much safer choices that give you a similar floating tropical feel. So what is the real takeaway from all of this? It is simply that a flower does not have to look dangerous to cause real harm. Sometimes the most beautiful blooms in the nursery are the ones that need the most caution, simply because they are so good at spreading. If you ever find yourself drawn to a plant with a similar look to one of these, there are almost always wonderful, well-behaved alternatives available. In Australia, gardeners looking for that same cheerful color often turn to native pigface or everlasting daisies instead of gazanias, and a native golden wattle or banksia instead of yellow bells. Here in the United States, your local extension office or native plant society can point you toward regionally appropriate substitutes with that same lovely look, without the ecological risk. The bigger lesson, no matter where you garden, is to always know what you are planting, and to check with a trusted local resource before adding something unfamiliar to your beds. Our gardens are meant to bring us joy, and a little bit of knowledge goes a long way toward keeping them that way, for us and for the wild places around us. It is worth remembering that none of these 7 flowers are bad plants in any moral sense. They are simply doing what plants do best, which is surviving and spreading wherever conditions allow. The real skill in gardening responsibly is understanding the specific environment you are planting into, and choosing species that will thrive without overwhelming everything around them. That is true whether you are tending a small container garden on a balcony or several acres out in the countryside. If this kind of topic interests you, I would love to make more videos exploring how gardening laws and invasive species lists differ from place to place, including a closer look at plants right here in the United States that carry similar warnings. There is always more to learn, and honestly, that is one of my favorite parts of this hobby. A garden never stops teaching you something new, even after years of digging in the dirt. I would love to know, did any of these 7 flowers surprise you? Have you ever grown one without realizing it had a reputation like this? Let me know down in the comments. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you have not already, consider subscribing to Golden Vault Garden so you never miss a new video. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today, and I will see you in the next one.